Introductions?
Jeremy Lokirko, Transpac Rep in City of Walnut Creek.
Eric Hughes, City of Pleasant Hill Rep.
Chad Smalley, City of Richmond Rep.
John Cunningham, Contra Costa County.
Ahmed Abu Ali, City of Antioch.
Yvette Ortiz, City of El Cerrito and WICTEC.
Dave Vaughton with MTC.
Steve Kersavan, City of Brentwood.
Heather Ballinger, City of Walnut Creek, representing City County Engineers.
Michael Tanner from BART.
There we go. Barbara Hawkins with City of San Pablo.
Andy Dillard, Town of Danville and SWAT.
Larry Bowen with the County Connection.
Thank you, everybody. So at this point, we will take any comments from the public on items not on the agenda. Seeing no public speakers, we'll move to approval of the summary actions for both the June 19, 2014 meeting and the August 21st, 2014 meetings. Do we have any comments or discussion? I just have one comment on the August meeting minutes. I forgot to sign in, but was at the meeting. Do I have any motions?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar. Oh, yeah. Welcome, Stephanie. Great. So consent calendar, moving on. Do I have any motions?
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. Okay, moving on to the regular agenda items, the project monitoring, upcoming obligation deadlines for federal aid projects and status of projects placed on the Federal Highway Administration quarterly inactive list. We have a staff report.
Hello. Hi. I'm Walt Allen with Parsons. I'm helping the CCTA with this project monitoring tracking effort. And usually I'm up here and kind of giving people scolding them a little bit about their projects being late. But I got to say that this time there are a lot of projects that are moving along and they're meeting their milestones, and that's really exciting. In the STIP project report, we have a couple of projects coming up in the city of Concord that are going to need some attention, and we're working with Concord City staff on that. The CMAQ obligation plan, which is the 2015 projects that are the OBAG projects that are due, those are all moving forward. They have met their milestones, and so that's really good. I did want to note that we moved 10 projects out of 2015 into 2016. So for those of you that move projects out, you don't have what you had this year. Your request for authorization was going to be for this next fiscal year is February 1st. For the projects that are programmed in fiscal year 2016, the deadline is November 1st. So if your project slipped a year, we moved that out. You didn't really get another year to get your paperwork together and meet all those milestones and get your request for authorization. So just want to encourage people to get moving on those. And that's really about it. Any questions? I'd be glad to answer that.
Any questions? Any motions? Or there's no, it's just information? Sorry.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. So moving on to item 5, approval of peer review for Richmond Transit Village East Side Improvements Project, BART to 19th Street and 19th Street to 27th Street. Hi, Brad.
Thanks, thank you. I'm Brad Beck. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner with the authority. In 2012, the authority approved the programming plan for, you may think I'm talking about the next item, but this is a little background on these two projects. They were in the programming plan that the authority approved in 2012 for the Program 12, the Transportation for Livable Communities, and Program 13, the Pedestrian, Bicycle, and Trail Facilities Program. There's two separate projects. One of them is funded through the TLC program, that's the BART to 19th Street, and the other is funded through the PBTF program, that's the 19th to 27th Street portion of it. They're related but separate projects. One of them provides access from 19th into the BART Capital Corridor Station. The other one provides a connection from 19th along Nevin Avenue to the Civic Center. We met with a peer review committee on September 29th, and they reviewed both those projects and had a number of comments. Comments and responses were in your packet for the BART to 19th project, and just the comments are in the packet, but we did send out the responses from the city via email earlier this week for the 19th to 27th Street project. So the peer review committee, after making a number of comments about the project, some very specific comments, and recommended that the TCC and the authority approve the peer review and approve the funding for construction for both these projects. And Chad Smalley is here today. If you have any specific comments about the project and its purpose, but we are asking that you recommend and approve the peer review for this project.
Do we have any questions from the committee members? I was just wondering if you could maybe summarize some of the comments from the peer review committee that were incorporated into the design.
Well, a lot of them are very specific comments on the drawings. Are the trees in the right location? How are the connections to the storm drainage going to work? How deep should the lines be? Are they too shallow? Are the light standards in the right location? There's a lot of discussion about the design of the traffic circle on 22nd Street. And whether that was an appropriate design. We didn't really come to a conclusion about that. There were issues about it, but the city is interested. Right now, 22nd is part of a two-way couplet with 23rd, and eventually the city is going to be making 23rd turn it back into a two-way street and make 22nd less of a through street. And Chad can add on to that.
Yeah, the 22nd and 23rd are proposed, or we've completed design development to convert those to two-way operation and introduce a full streetscape, full rebuild of those two streets. And that was a project of the former redevelopment agency, and so is really, at this point, is severely underfunded, and we continue to search for funding for that, but it may need to be a longer-term vision to complete that job, and it may require phasing that job into smaller pieces. The traffic circle in question was actually on 24th Street, which is a lower volume street than either 22nd or 23rd. And while we appreciate the peer reviewers' comments and input on that particular design treatment, the city likewise has spent a lot of time with that specific element. Almost everything else in the project is fairly straightforward: bulb outs at intersections, pedestrian scaled lighting, stormwater treatment, and bicycle striping. as well as enhanced crosswalks. The traffic circle was proposed as more of a different way to treat what's a wider intersection with much lower volumes than is seen on the other cross streets. And it took a lot of analysis to get it to the point that's proposed in the design that we have. We recognize that there may be some differences of opinion about how and whether to use stop control and where at that intersection. And our response to that generally is that that's a relatively easy thing to change. That we would like to go with our traffic consultant's recommendation as designed, which includes stop control, but then alter that if we find that it doesn't perform to our expectations.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions?
I apologize for being late. I'm used to riding my motorcycle and took a car today, and it wasn't as much fun. Couldn't find a parking space. Not used to that. Thank you for conducting this review. I had a few questions. One is, I guess facade design was not part of the review. That's kind of one question. The second question is regarding the landscaping comments. So I assume that the standards that they're reviewing against are low water, kind of native, C3 sensitive. Okay, because I didn't know what standard they were reviewing it against. And then the other is on the responses to comment, when they say forwarded to sub-consultant, how does that loop back happen, or how does that relate kind of to the review kind of in general? Thank you.
So we expedited this peer review in getting the responses because we really wanted to get it in front of the TCC at this meeting. And so the way it will be addressed is through our principal, our prime consultant, design consultant, question engineers on that job. There were a number of specific questions that they could not immediately address that were part of their sub-consultant team. But they're relatively minor in scope, and they will be addressed. And so we were trying to turn the responses around quickly enough to meet the agenda deadline for this. But we will be responding to those comments.
And so facade design is not part of the review then, it's strictly...
In terms of the private development of joining the street, no, it's not. And it's interesting you bring that up because that was actually something that our council brought up in the early stages of developing this project and assembling the funding was that, wow, this is great, but can you do something for the adjoining private properties, the fences, the buildings? I mean, a lot of them are in disrepair. The answer at that time was yes. It is because at that time we had planned to couple our redevelopment programs, in particular our housing rehab programs, with this project in order to get some improvements and try to get a focused effort on the private side of the project. However, that reality has changed, obviously, and all of the funding sources in this project are strictly narrowed to the improvements in the public right of way. And so we'll continue to search for opportunities to improve the environment there, but we are much more constrained than we were when we started. I will say that for a large portion, there's a large development site between 23rd and 22nd that basically takes an entire 2 blocks. It was a former employment and development office of the states, and it's been in private ownership for many years and has been vacant for many years. We're happy to announce that a project is moving its way through the entitlement process now to construct a couple hundred affordable housing units on that site in a 5-story podium type construction. So 2 blocks at least will be significantly changed by that project. And we like to think, too, that degree of investment will have some spillover effects, some catalyzing effects in changing that whole corridor.
That's great, and I want to just keep pushing my brothers and sisters who are engineering trained to continue to try to just cross over into that planning realm of placemaking, aesthetic, and urban design as we, kind of mesh all of this land use, housing, and transportation work together, that it creates a community when we integrate those concepts.
Yes, Barbara?
I was wondering, I noticed that there were a couple of comments regarding conflicts, potential conflicts with utilities and trees. And so what would happen, because you can't really change all of the storm drains and the utilities, are there some thoughts of modifying the design then?
Yeah, the trees will move. That's basically the answer. I mean, in a nutshell, is that we recognize that in plan there are a few areas that might be a little close and that are going to basically need to be sort of field locate in some cases. What we find is that, I mean, the fact of the matter is that during construction, oftentimes these utilities aren't in the places that they say they are in the first place, and so it does require a degree of flexibility during construction. We're prepared for that. We've in fact, this same team has built several of these similar projects in Richmond with the same utilities, and based on that experience, we feel well equipped to make the adjustments on the fly that are needed. Where possible, we have tried to design around those conflicts, and we have in the 19th to 27th project, for example, we have done some positive location and potholing of utilities as part of another unrelated project and used that data for this project. So we feel relatively confident that we've minimized to the extent possible the conflicts, but recognize that we will need to think on our feet, so to speak.
What I noticed, and maybe the design conflict was with trees and storm drains, but it sounded like the storm drains were rather shallow, and is that being potholed to verify that before I just would hate to have too much design go forward and then you get in the field and you find that.
Yeah, we will confirm that before we get that far into the process.
Do I have any motions?
I'll move approval. Is that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, I move approval of the project.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Approved unanimously. Okay, moving on to item 6, the CCTA Measure J programs 12 and 13 report on status of the projects.
Yes, thank you. As I mentioned earlier, in 2012, the authority approved a programming plan for programs 12 and 13, allocating about $22 million to those two programs to fund 43 projects. One ended up getting money from other sources and didn't need their money. So it's down to 42, and we're reporting on what's the status of those projects after 2.5 years of having the money available. And that's what the monitoring report is about. The majority of the projects are capital, 33% of them, and then about 93% of the funding, not surprisingly, will go to the capital projects. The majority of the capital of the planning projects are TLC projects. There are a couple of PBTF projects that are doing primarily, especially the study for it's a PSR really for around the Bailey SR4 interchange, looking at improvements to the bicycle pedestrian environment along Bailey Road. We have a couple of steps. As you've gone through our process, you know that where first you get the money allocated to you, then you request the funding appropriation, then you invoice for your work, and then if you're required, you have to do a peer review. Just went through peer review for 2 of them. In terms of the project status, for the plans and studies, there are 9 of them, as I mentioned before. 2 of them are complete, 6 of them are underway, and 1 of them has not begun yet. We were hoping to be a little further along on that. For the capital projects, about 14 of them, the majority, about half of them are underway, but in the design phase, and 5 of them are in construction. One of which I'm happy to announce will probably be open pretty soon. That's the Carquinez Scenic Drive. That should be open. They said this month. I'm waiting for the announcement. I think it might actually be next month. So if you're a bicyclist who likes to ride along the Carquinez Strait, you don't have to worry about sliding off down into the strait itself now. Project schedule. Everyone was asked what your schedule was back in 2012. There's 6 out of the 42 are not expecting a delay in delivery of their projects. 16 of them will be delayed more than 2 years, and the average delay is about 1.5 years. That raises some concerns for us here at the authority that we expect there might be some delay. You never know exactly what's going to happen when you actually start to construct your project. 1.5 years was a little more of a delay than we were expecting to have. I mean, there are lots of reasons why that could happen. Staff changes, for example, unforeseen right-of-way issues. But still, the delay's a little bit longer than we were hoping. In terms of the project funding, we have 2 tables in here that are a little bit maybe hard to, it takes a little bit to read through them. In terms of phasing, the majority of the funding obviously is going to go into construction. As I mentioned before, the majority of the fund, well, maybe I shouldn't put it that way, but the other delay that we're having is invoicing. 100% of the funding has been programmed, which we did in 2012. About half of it, well, about $6.7 million has been appropriated. $15 million has been appropriated. That's about 70%. But of that appropriated funding, only about 16% has been invoiced. So this is a reminder that we hope that if you're going through and getting money, that you invoice for it so that we can pay you for the work that you've conducted. So we don't like having those invoices hanging out. We have a list of the upcoming appropriations. We expect to have the Walnut Creek appropriation in 2015. We're setting up a peer review for their 65% drawings. You should, we hope, be seeing the peer review for that project at your next meeting in November. Concord Central, they're going to ask for a peer review pretty soon as well, so you'll be seeing that. There are some other projects that seem to be, we're not sure when they're going to be doing their projects and coming in and asking you for peer reviews or us for appropriations. Anyway, one of our questions for you is, are there things that the authority can be doing to help project sponsors deliver their projects? Are there concerns with the process? We would like to be able to go out to our public and say, yes, we're giving out this money, and yes, the sponsors are delivering projects for the people of Contra Costa. So that's my report, and if you have any questions or comments, we'd like to hear them.
Any questions, comments from the committee? Chad?
I would offer that because having just gone through this and recently, just now completed the peer review, one of the things that actually I believe helped a lot in that particular circumstance with both the Nevin projects, they were hung up in Caltrans' purgatory of federal aid process for a long time. And it wasn't until CCTA staff also started reaching out to Caltrans and pinging them with, what's the status of this? We're interested in this as well. That things started to move a little bit quicker, at least in my view. So that actually was very helpful. And to the extent that some of these projects are in that same scenario where they're being hung up by other agencies' reviews, CCTA is apparently got a little more pull than I do with Caltrans, so it seemed to work pretty well in that case.
That is something we do like to play a role in if we can.
I think for us, what's been helpful is just initial meetings and ongoing meetings. How can we support? What do you need? Because you're competing against a lot of other funding sources that we've had to obtain to get projects done, as well as other special projects in the general public and our customer service and everything. So it's been super helpful to just have staff just outreach and say, we realize you've just signed that contract. Can we help you with next steps? Concluding that meeting with when is the next meeting that we can set up just to see how we can help you. I think that's been helpful for us.
So I was just trying to make the staff report make sense in my mind. And at first you mentioned these 16 projects that are delayed 2+ years. And then this table that's more specific where you go into actual agencies. Are these some of the 16 and you just don't list all of the 16 here, or is that, do you understand my question?
Excuse me. You mean the attachment A at the very end?
No. I was looking actually at page 6-9, but attachment A would be all of the projects, right?
Attachment A is all of the projects that are, and they're sorted by whether they're completed, whether in the study phase, whether they're in the design phase, or what construction, or whether they haven't begun yet. So the ones that haven't begun yet are listed at the very end, and there are 10 of them. Is that right? Yes, there are 10 of them.
And then those are the ones that are here on this, that you don't know when they're going to appropriate funds?
Yeah, at the very, on page 6-9, there are appropriations. These are projects that still need to get appropriations. Some of the projects that haven't begun have appropriations. They just haven't begun to use the money yet. That's one of the things we don't have. We have a pretty general, you have 3 years to spend the money appropriated from the date of the resolution. We have granted extensions. That's pretty, I don't know if I would say it's generous, but it's not a bad length of time to deliver a project. These particular ones, I think there's actually, no, we don't know when the appropriations are going to be for the ones that say unspecified.
So is there a bigger question out there besides how do we get, how do you become more helpful? Or is there a question of should some of these projects be sort of thrown back into the hopper, so to speak, and reallocated? Is that out there, or am I jumping ahead?
That's a possibility. I mean, it is one thing that the authority could consider if projects aren't delivering on time as under the schedule that they've promised, and it exceeds a certain length of time. We could consider saying, you haven't delivered the project, so we'll use this money for some other projects. That is certainly a possibility.
Yeah. Well,
we haven't done that before, but that's...
Yeah. I'm not trying to penalize anybody. I'm not really, I don't want to make enemies here. I just, like the one that's more than 36 months, I mean, that's that doesn't meet your 3-year criteria just right there, right? So,
Well, it's from the time of appropriation. Some of them
I
have
see.
not appropriated
okay,
yet.
so that's why there's a,
Or they've appropriated for their design phase, but they haven't appropriated for construction.
and I had one more question, but it's a different, the East Bay Regional Park District, the remaining funds, how is that being programmed or?
The requirements of Measure J for that, Measure J sets aside 0.5% of the revenues to the East Bay Regional Park District for maintenance and improvement of paved regional trails. And the other requirement of that is that the district has to go to the 4 RTPCs and propose a set of improvements. Now they have to spend roughly the same amount of money in each of the 4 areas. They have gone to TransPac for Central County. They've gone to TransPlan for East County. They have yet to go to WICTAC or to SWAT. They've told me that they are soon to go to WICTAC to propose a set of improvements, or maybe they already have.
Yeah, they went to the TAC last week, and and the TAC approved their project or recommended approval to the board.
Okay, so once WICTAC approves that list, then the district will approach us and say, we would like to allocate, there's $986,200, and roughly half of that would go to West County for their trails. And the remaining money will go to Southwest for maintenance and improvement of regional trails in La Miranda and the San Ramon Valley.
I just had a comment about the projects listed on page 6-9, and just kind of to answer Heather's question. I don't think that project, like the El Cerrito project, the Lonely Green Wayfinding project, is late. The money was available to us in 2015, so it's not necessarily late. It's just hasn't been appropriated yet.
That is true. Though because we are sitting on some cash, we possibly could go to those projects that were programmed later and say, we've got this cash sitting around here. Maybe we could move you forward. The first time the first programming plan was through fiscal year 16. So there were some projects that were programmed in 16, and their schedule reflects that as well.
Brad, I had just a quick question for you. The staff report indicates that there's a potential that the board or the authority rather would delay the next call for projects. Has there been any additional thought on whether or not, because all of these projects, some of them appear to be lagging behind, what kind of delay we're talking about in terms of a time frame? And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on kind of that thought process.
Well, we haven't talked yet to the board about this issue. One thought that we have had is that maybe we could do a call for projects for these 2 programs at the same time that we did the next OBAG call for projects. The next OBAG call for project was scheduled for the spring of 2015. It's probably going to be the spring of 2016. Dave is nodding his head that I have got it right. That kind of coordination wouldn't necessarily be an easy thing to do. The TLC and PBTF programs have their own set of requirements. The TLC program is, for example, allocated to the RTPCs who make the final recommendations to the authority on which projects to fund. One advantage of trying to coordinate the 2 programs is that there's a lot more money potentially available through the OBAG funding than through programs 12 and 13, especially compared to program 13. which is only 1.5%, and 1% of the revenues is competitive throughout the county. So it would be a way to leverage the Measure J money and add it to the OBAG money to get some bigger projects developed in Contra Costa. But that would require coordination among the 4 RTPCs as well as at the authority level. So that could be tricky, but it could have a benefit for getting those bigger projects that we might otherwise not be able to get.
So that's really, it's more of a strategy discussion than
Yes.
it is because these projects that have previously been funded have not completed or begun yet. Is that?
Yeah, there are 2 issues. One is the delay, that on average projects are a year and a half later than they said they were going to be. And part of that could be an overabundance of optimism when you put their initial schedule together. Everyone likes to be optimistic about how fast they can get their projects developed. Redoing my front yard, for example, it's taken me a lot longer than I thought it would. Of course, breaking my clavicle didn't help. So that's one issue is, we don't want to dump a bunch of more money into projects where you haven't delivered the projects that we've already allocated money to. And the other is that strategy issue of maybe we could use the Measure J money to leverage these OBAG funds to get bigger projects. Maybe we can. Maybe it's too difficult, and it has its own issues.
I've long been a proponent of coordinating that OBAG program and any other federal program with the Measure J funds in such a way that allows us to help get bigger projects and actually help make the match in these more fiscally constrained times. And so I almost don't want to suggest this, but I wonder, has there been any thought given to doing a call now in designing that call in such a way for future years, basically? Designing that call in such a way that requires a really robust demonstration of project readiness to go to construction, which would allow you then to reprogram these stalled projects into outer years and then award and then flush the cash out now to projects that are ready to go. And I don't know countywide whether there exists a big trough of projects ready to go that are in that scenario, but I know that locally I have a few and that have shortfalls that we're going to be hat in hand to somebody to try to get these things funded and bid. I wonder that there might not be other jurisdictions with the same sort of scenario where they've got projects that could go now.
That's something we don't know. What's the reservoir of projects that are ready to go, shovel ready, as the term is used often. It does suggest that the next time we have a call for project that readiness should be something we consider when we decide which projects get funded. I know some of the projects had some surprises when they started looking in more detail at what they said they were going to do, and that it was going to cost a lot more money to do what they said they were going to do than the grant would allow them to do. And if the projects were a little more fleshed out and a little closer to being ready to go, that should be taken into consideration the next time. The other thing is we could also just spend money on construction and not fund design and have the design done as part of the locals' contribution. I know there are ups and downsides to that approach, but that is something else that we're talking about.
I just wanted to build off of Chad and Michelle's comments earlier in terms of how to support some of these projects. I think with Caltrans and CCTA, if you could have like regular office hours or something where you actually do meet with Caltrans local assistant staff and local jurisdiction staff to like help facilitate those projects that are stalled. And it's a regular time every month where we all CCTA staff, Caltrans staff could meet and just work through those projects. Just an idea.
Now, of course, a lot of these projects don't have any federal money on them. And some, especially in these programs, especially I think the PBTF, the Carquinez Scenic Drive project being a real exception to that, since it's got, I think, 8 separate sources of funding. But for the ones that do have the federal money, I think that's something we can consider, trying to set up meetings, joint meetings, to try to get those processes going. I know one of the issues Caltrans has with us, and not just Contra Costa, is that when MTC has a program that they send down to the CMAs to allocate the funding, they get a lot of projects back. And I know Caltrans would prefer to get big projects back because that costly projects, because that means fewer projects, which makes their bureaucratic nightmares a little easier to deal with. That's another issue that I'm sure that Caltrans would like us to consider when we allocate funding.
Question. What I don't see on the tables, and maybe you've had it in other reports, are the costs for the projects, so I can gauge which are the big projects and which are the small projects. On attachment A, it lists numbers. It looks like, and I'm thinking this is by calendar year, the 12 would be calendar year 12.
On attachment A, we have a project ID for each project in the agency, but yes, it doesn't have the amount of Measure J money that the projects have allocated to them. We do have that information, not surprisingly.
But in addition to the Measure J allocation, the estimated project cost, to see whether or not there is the sufficient funding for the project to move forward, if you're trying to see which ones would have a better chance of getting delivered quickly.
Yeah, we do have that information. We have the total cost. We have asked for that. Some agencies are a little more forthcoming with it than others, but most of them do list the different sources and the amounts, usually by phase.
Any other questions? I think you were just taking comments. Oh, Jeremy.
The only other comment that I'll make is I remember when we were reviewing the TLC grants, and one of the things that came up in the review is that it seemed like the schedules that were being proposed by the applicants were very aggressive, and almost so much so because it was kind of pushed by the authority to maintain a very rigorous schedule. And so I know some of us kind of question, is this even attainable? Can this even be accomplished, the schedule that's being proposed? And so I don't know if there's been any thought given to having those kind of comments sent back to the applicants, or realigning the expectations with the authority for these specific projects that maybe are taking a little bit longer, because I do know that, a lot of the schedules were very aggressive, and it wasn't just one project. It were many applications that were proposed very aggressive schedules. So I was wondering if maybe the scheduling could be the issue.
Well, like I said before, there was a lot of optimism in some of the schedules, and I know when we looked at some of the reviewing the PBTF projects that applied, that there were questions about whether they could actually deliver on that schedule. We were not judging the projects really on how quickly the projects or what, that a project that would be done earlier necessarily would be more likely to get the funding. From our point of view, having a realistic schedule is a good thing, and it reflects on the agency's realistic estimate of what it takes to deliver the project. I think we wouldn't necessarily, and probably wouldn't, judge a project by what it says on the schedule as much as how far they have gone in the process of defining the project and what they're going to do. So if you had a project with 65% drawings done, and it said that it's going to cost a certain amount, you would have a much more faith in that estimate than you would if they had done conceptual drawings for a project. And that estimate of cost, you would think not necessarily as close. It could be, but be less likely to be accurate ultimately.
I guess just one quick follow-up on Jeremy's comment. Sure. I think part of it could be almost encouraged, just the way the applications are sometimes worded. A lot of times I hear the word show-ready projects, on applications all the time, and so naturally when people are going after money, what are they going to do? They're going to come up with a schedule, however optimistic it is, to match that schedule. So if our goal here is to, in the future, to have agencies on applications from the get-go come up with realistic schedules, make it, upfront about it.
Are there any way that you think would be good to phrase that? If you're asking the question, how realistic is your schedule? How much evidence do you have that your estimate of the cost or schedule is good? It's a hard one, but I understand your point that if you ask a question in a certain way, people will try to respond to it in a way that makes their project look positive. I mean, we all do that. If I were to write a grant for a project, I would try to make it sound as positive as possible.
I know that maybe a couple cycles ago, there was a highway safety improvement program through Caltrans, and you had to submit a schedule, and they actually had, you had to list every single step along the way, and then they gave you a recommended time frame for certain steps, like 2 to 3 months for certain steps, and maybe just requiring that schedule to submittal to be much more robust than just 4 milestone dates.
I think on other projects that I've managed for larger grants, they've required us to provide examples of other projects of substantial size that have been met on budget, on time, under the initial project construction timeline. So we've had to prove that we've actually been able to deliver using project examples from the past.
So one more thing we can look at is we can
I guess I would just comment that I feel like we're going the wrong way in some regards. I mean, if a project does go through the process and then can make it, and it's a good project, we don't want to penalize it just because it doesn't have necessarily 35% or a CEQA document done. And so, this is our one pot of money that we don't have to go through E76s, and we don't have to go through all the Caltrans rigmarole. And so I just don't want to swing the pendulum the other way and hurt ourselves as local agencies trying to get these projects through. I would rather be, if I had, and it's just one opinion, more nimble in the, hey, it didn't work out, here's the money back, let's put it towards the good for all of Contra Costa. So I'd rather be more flexible that way, you know. So anyway.
Is it possible that some of the projects are not moving forward because they need additional funds? And once they get additional funds, they can either finish design or complete construction? Because having that information may give you enough, an opportunity to work with some of those projects that have more money in later years and maybe find some other funds to help them get things completed on time.
I'm looking at the list of the ones that haven't begun. I don't think that's, except for the ones that are not begun, no, that's not true. I know the Hercules one has got, since it's tied into a very complicated project that the authority is now working on, trying to help facilitate, that those two projects are kind of stuck with the rest of the project of building the Hercules Intermodal Transit Center. So that's not a question. I mean, definitely funding is an issue, but it is not the primary issue for the delay on that project. I know on a lot of the other ones, the delays are there isn't enough staff to get started on the project. They're caught in another project they're doing. Staff changes on at least one project. Some of the projects are just about ready to go, and they were sort of starting about when they were supposed to start, which was a little bit later. I need to contact some of the sponsors about a couple of the other ones and why exactly they haven't started yet. But the lack of funding, I know in one is an issue that they're having to deal with in the design phase, but they are in the design phase, and that's how the issue came up.
I think that's it. You were just taking comments from
Yeah,
the
and
committee.
I appreciate the thoughts that you guys have shared with us.
Right, thanks. And I think that's the end of the meeting. Thank you.